Oops. Hello, and thank you all for joining us for the last technical session of the Wisconsin Land and Water Conference. This session is Outside the Box, Creative Ways to Leverage Partnerships, Funding, and Resources to Further Your Conservation Efforts. We're going to hear from 4 counties. First up, we have Greg Baneck from Outagamie. Then we'll hear from Kyle Minks from Dane County. And then there'll be a joint presentation from Jim Arch in Clark County and Greg Leonard from Eau Claire. We have an assistant here, Dan McFarland from Wapaka County, that will be helping moderate the questions. So please use the chat box as things come up, and he will help with the Q&A at the end of each of these presenters. We'll have pauses after they're each done. Take it away, Greg Baneck.
All right, thanks, Kate. Well, we drew the short straw of the last session on the last day on a Friday afternoon of the conference when it's nice outside, but thanks for sticking around. And I'm kind of leading off this session, with a little bit more general perspective on kind of expanding your program and taking advantage of your opportunities. Like they say, you never really want to see the sausage be made. You just want to enjoy the sausage at the end, and that's kind of the analogy for funding a good, robust program. I think we have a delay. I'm going to try to advance my slide here, hopefully. There we go. I found the right button. Sorry about that. So, I mean, the annual budgeting process these days is getting more and more challenging with, all of the different programs that we're all trying to implement across the state. We've all got, very unique programs, and I think those LCC members who serve on the Land and Water Board, who are lucky enough to hear all of those different land and water plans, get to hear all of the different programs that are going on. But it's definitely not a one size fits all anymore. The further and longer we get into conservation in Wisconsin, you have to be really creative with how you're funding your program. So more and more, we're getting multiple funding streams to fund our programs as our programs get more robust. And as we add positions, some of our staff positions are likely funded or dependent on those funding streams. And it increases our programmatic demands within the department. The more funding sources we get, the more administration it takes to help track those funding sources and meet the grant obligations. And as for the last however long the county levy limits have been on, it's not just as easy as asking for more levy money for your land conservation program, because it's taking it away from another county department to increase your land conservation efforts. So it's more and more challenging. In a perfect world, back in the good old days where it was levy money and, maybe some swarm grant money, or, trickle in some priority watershed money, it was a windfall of money with very few reporting requirements. And it was just, boots on the ground work with a pretty solid funding source. But more and more lately, it's tightening of our funding sources and forcing us all to be a little bit more creative. So, it's helped making us take advantage of those opportunities as they come available. We've been pretty fortunate in Outagamie County just by our sheer location of being in the Great Lakes Basin. It opens us up for Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. That's probably a little bit more than a third or more of the state qualifies for that pot of funding. We're also blessed with an area of concern, the lower Bay of Green Bay and the lower Fox River, which opened some other channels of funding for us to help fund some of our programs and our initiatives. TMDLs are another great, can be a source of funding. If you utilize the goals and the targets within that TMDL, you can help utilize that planning effort to help to justify those grants you're going after. Different basin initiatives and lots of planning early on. We were pretty fortunate, back more than 10 years ago already, to be able to utilize some leftover funding that DNR had available, that we were able to fund our first 9-kilometer watershed plan. And from there, we added a full-time, pretty much full-time planner to help write those watershed plans. Many of you know Sarah Cuso on our staff, and she does a fantastic job of helping us with our watershed planning and tracking of our different grants and modeling. And she's kind of a jack of all trades, but we've turned her planning efforts and her 9-kilometer plans into millions of dollars of funding for our programs. And like I said, the trick is to take advantage of as many of those opportunities as you're planning that will help support those plans that you've written. I talked about GLRI, Mississippi River Basin Initiative for those counties that aren't in the Great Lakes area, may open some opportunities there. Trim grants, we've utilized those 9-kilometer plan watersheds in our county. We broke it down to the Huck 12 level, and that's where we've been doing our 9-kilometer watershed planning within the TMDL watershed. So we take those 30,000 acre-ish watersheds, and we're implementing those on the order of their delivery within the TMDL. So it helps us prioritize our approach, so we're getting the most bang for our buck and getting the most reductions we can working toward the TMDL implementation. And the other trick that we're working toward is stringing grants together and timing them out, so that we can, as we bring on additional staff, we can roll those staff from one project to the next, and we're not seeing any ebbs and flows in staffing, because you stick a lot of resources into training those staff, and they're a great resource for you, and you hate to lose anybody and have a loss of that capacity within your department. So that's pretty key when rolling from grant to grant. And the big thing is to make sure the grant's a good fit for the goals of your individual project. There's tons of grants out there, and you don't want to shift your program just to fit the grant. You want to make sure it's the right grant for the program, and make sure it's worth the effort. Unfortunately, a $50,000 grant can take as much administrative paperwork as $1 million grant can, and you start to get to a point where you have to ask yourself, is that tracking worth, or the effort worth, the money that you're going to get through that grant? One thing we've learned is, it's like investing. Your investment portfolio, you don't necessarily want to put all of your eggs in one basket. And same thing with your county budget. You don't want to put all of your reliance upon one funding source. This is our current 2022 budget for our department, just to give you an idea of all the different sources of funding that we fund our program with. The orange, if it's hard to read, on the lower left, or on the left side, is our county levy. And then all of the other multiple sources that we tap to help fund our programs. Trim grants make up a good source. GLRI, we have an agreement with New Water, one of our point sources on adaptive management, and then all of the other grants that help to fund our program. So if any one of those runs out, like I say, we don't have all of our eggs in one basket, and we're always looking for additional sources to implement our plans. The key when you start adding all those different funding sources is tracking is huge. More grants equals more tracking, more administration, more paperwork. So 10, 15 years ago, when we only had a handful of grants, match wasn't as hard to track. But with all the different funding sources now, it's harder and harder to track. So we and then the flavor of funding is important, because we have to match most of those grants, and you can't, in many cases, match federal funding with federal funding. You can't always match federal funding with federal funding, because depending on where the state funding is coming from, it may also have a federal tie. So it's important to know the flavor of the money and how you can utilize match to maximize your ability to bring in grant dollars. And then just an important note, if you bring in more than $750,000 in federal funding in a year, it kicks you over to what they call a major program, and it just increases your audit requirements. Finally, one thing that we were fortunate that our finance director, she was our comptroller, was a Excel spreadsheet guru, and she helped to put together a really robust tracking spreadsheet that helps us track all of our different funding sources, our match, and our staff time associated with those different grants. So I was going to click over to it, but I'm sure I'm getting close to the end of my time. But if anybody's interested in that tracking spreadsheet, I'm more than happy to share it with folks, because it was a huge game changer for us in helping us to more accurately track our grants, track our match. There's a tab on there for staff, each staff position, and it helps us track how each staff position is funded, their percentage of time, and which grant that's coming out of it. It helps us be really transparent with where our funding is coming from, what's being matched to what, and helps us through the audit process as well. So with that, I can answer any quick questions. Otherwise, I can do those in the chat while the other guys are going.
Just a couple of things. One, Dave from NRCS, I think, just wanted to put a plug in for reminding folks of the NWQI, NRCS's special funding. So don't forget about that. And then Amy had a question for you, Greg, about your funding sources and the pie chart that you had that showed all the funding sources. Did that include funding for staff and outreach, or was it just for the conservation practices?
Nope, that's our entire budget. So that had staff funding rolled in with the practice funding and everything else.
And one just popped up again for you, Greg. Can you please share your email address? Maybe put that in the chat for folks who want to talk to you
Sure.
afterwards.
All right, if there's no further questions, Kyle, we'll queue you up next if you could share your screen.
Is that coming through, Kate?
Yep, looks great.
Great.
Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Greg. I appreciate you setting me up pretty well for the next part of my presentation here. For those that don't know me, my name is Kyle Minks, and I'm a watershed manager with Dane County Land and Water Resources Department. And today I'm going to present to you all a little bit on a project that we have, and we're successful with 5 other partners in being awarded a regional conservation partnership program funding through the USDA-NRCS this past year. The goal of our project is to improve soil health and water quality. And there's a map kind of over here on the right-hand side that shows our project area, which is pretty large. It covers roughly half of our county. So we did expand that for reasons that I'll go into a little bit later here in the presentation, but does cover a pretty large area. And it's a 5-year project that we have outlined for that funding, covering roughly 440,000 acres. Again, large project area. With a funding amount of roughly around 11.6 million. So it's a big price tag, of which 1.8 million is funding from NRCS directly. And then the remaining funding is from our partners, which totals a little less than 9.8. So again, thanks to all of our partners, which I'll list here shortly, in making this a successful award through that NRCS program. So I'm going to highlight some of the successes, I think, on how we were able to secure that funding. The first one being the partnerships. That was definitely key. In addition to that, go into a little bit on how we built a lot of flexibility within the project, which will set us up for good success here over the next 5 years. And then lastly, I'll touch on a little bit of some of the more innovative things that we did to try to also set us up for success for the project. So the first thing that I'll kind of highlight with the partnerships, which I'm sure many people listening in on the presentation already know, is that it brings forth a lot of diversity, which is great. And that diversity is in both staff resources, perspectives, ideas, And it really sets us up well to be successful in the project. With that diversity also comes a lot of expanded capacity. So each partner brings forth different communication networks, different people that they know, and that also leads into just getting general knowledge about the project out there a lot better with either its individual landowners or just the community at large. And we found that just that expanded knowledge around the community sets us up for success in getting budgets and funding and building off of former projects to continue moving forward with potentially future projects. In addition to that too, I think it's also important that we kind of identified each partner's strengths and limitations. And what I mean by that is like a certain limitation that we sometimes have at the county is, and I think in a lot of conservation departments is our communication. But that limitation, I guess, is a strength of one of, or a couple of our other partners. A couple of noteworthy ones is the Clean Lakes Alliance and the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association. So they do a great job, whether it's working with landowners and individuals on communication materials, and then as well as the Clean Lakes in connecting with our more urban folks within the watershed. So in addition to the partnerships, I also talked a little bit about flexibility, and how we were successful in doing that is we really set out at the beginning to make sure we had some robust objectives within our project. So objectives are important, right, to make sure that they're both measurable and achievable. But we also made sure that we could set up multiple ways to achieve our objectives, whether that's by diversity and partnerships. We might have one objective where the intent was for the county to achieve it, but if we were to fall short, there's other partners, say Yahara Winds or NRCS, that could maybe help us pick up that shortcoming. We also were really adamant on trying to make sure that we set achievable funding goals. So on the onset, we could have went big, right, and included everything in the kitchen sink on what we've tried to want to make sure we could achieve. But we found that we oftentimes succeed more if we hold back a little bit or make sure that we can achieve what we all agreed to commit to the project on the onset. And so we wanted to really stress that with our partners to make sure that whatever people are able to contribute, that those are truly achievable. And it also set us up a little bit too for success moving into the future, because we also know that those funding sources might change over time, and budgets also change. And so we wanted to make sure we were flexible in that. And lastly, on the flexibility, we also set ourselves up with those objectives on the onset, is making sure that as new things comes down the line for the different organizations and partnerships, if they do have a positive impact on soil health or water quality, that we could take credit for that and put it towards the project over the long term. Because it's very hard to predict over 5 years what might change or what might be available in the future. The last slide that I have to just kind of touch on here briefly is the innovation on how our project was successful. And really when I'm saying innovation, I guess I'm more saying leveraging resources, and Greg touched on a lot of that through his presentation as well. Leveraging is how we defined innovation. And that's including examples of how we were able to stack financial resources for cost share programs. A good example is a lot of times our department struggles with funding some of the management type programs, whether that's cover crops or rotational grazing. We partnered with WINS and MMSD to be able to secure some funding through resources that they had available to use those to promote those practices and work through our department. In addition to that, we also leveraged a lot of different projects. Some of the big ones being out there, we've got our continuous cover program through the county, which is a huge program on its own, but we took that program and wrapped it into this project as well to be kind of a match or additional contributions. Other example of that as well is we've got a detailed watershed project we're going through, trying to map drainage networks and watersheds using some NRCS tools, and we incorporated that within the project scope as well. And lastly, I'll kind of touch on a little bit the communication strategies. in partnering with both the Clean Lakes Alliance as well as the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association. It really set ourselves up to be successful, to be able to communicate with different groups and organizations. Some of those being the farmer-led groups that we have within the watershed, even though we don't have them signed on as official partners. They're great conduits to reach out to those organizations, continue communicating with them. Promotions at different events is definitely key. And then again, we also partner pretty heavily with the Clean Lakes Alliance, who does a number of events on kind of more of the urban front. They hold 101 kind of science sessions where they can bring folks in to talk about technical topics related to soil health and water quality. They do a great job in kind of educating and informing other people that are in the community, kind of build that support around allocating resources, leveraging funding sources to try to promote this project and move forward the effort. So with that, I can take any questions. I think we still have a little bit of time.
I'm seeing none. I did post a couple of links in the chat for those to check out that Kyle mentioned in his presentation. So those are there.
We do have some time for questions too. So if anybody has anything they'd like to hear from Kyle, you can also unmute yourself and ask him directly. All right, I don't hear anything coming in, but you can always type them in the chat and Kyle can get to them over the next presentation. Up next, we have Jim Arch and Greg Leonard. Greg, I can see your screen is coming up here.
All right, you have my screen up and hear me?
Yep, and I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Leonard with Eau Claire County, and with me today also is Jim Arch from Clark County. Jim, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. As Greg said, my name is Jim Arch. I'm the land conservationist for Clark County. So today, Greg and myself are going to be talking about working with partnering with entities to secure funding. Greg and myself were able to receive a large-scale trim grant from the DNR for a couple of cover crop demo plot projects. While both projects are individual, they are both located in the Eau Claire River watershed basin. Just some details about the Eau Claire River watershed. It is located in west central Wisconsin and covers an area of 882 square miles or approximately 564,536 acres. The largest administrative areas within the watershed include Eau Claire County at 47%, Clark County at 38.5%. The watershed also covers 9% of Chippewa County, 3.8% of Taylor County, and 1.5% of Jackson County. The major ecological landscapes in the watershed are forest transition at 34%, western coulee and ridges at 34%, central sand plains at 24%, and north central forest at 7%. There are some unique changing geology features also between the counties in the watershed. Silt loams are in the west, glacial outwash sands are in central, and heavy silt clays are in the north. Heavy cropping is done in the northern and western portions with more forest in the central areas. Both Clark and Eau Claire counties have rapidly growing plain faith or Amish and Mennonite communities in the watershed. Mennonites are more concentrated in northern Clark County, and the Amish are more concentrated in Eau Claire County around the Augusta area. A key characteristic of these communities is that in most cases, the Amish and Mennonites will not take cost sharing So the usual means of getting farmers to do conservation practices does not work with them. Another characteristic is that Mennonites are generally dairy farmers. The Amish are more small-scale dairy, goat dairy, hogs, and chicken farmers. And they will also usually have a small sawmill on the side. Similar to other areas in Wisconsin, agriculture done by the non-plain faith is shifting from dairy farming to cash grain farming. One of the partnering entities that was really important that helped secure the TRIM grant was West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. West Central Regional Planning Commission is a multi-county planning agency created under Wisconsin state statute that is charged with planning for physical, social, and economic development of the region. West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission developed a 9 key element plan for the Eau Claire River watershed in 2018. Another key entity that was involved in developing the 9 key element plan was the Eau Claire River Watershed Coalition. The coalition was started in 2015 and is made up of lakeshore owners, lake associations, a UW Extension natural resource educator, land conservation departments, farmers, and concerned citizens. Clark and Eau Claire County used the information from the 9 key element plan that identified one of the major causes for the poor water quality in the watershed as sediment and phosphorus coming off of farm fields as justification for the cover crop demo plot project. Another tool used for leveraging the grant is the Mead Lake TMDL. Mead Lake is located in Clark County and is fed by the South Fork of the Eau Claire River and has an approved TMDL that was done in 2008 that lists sediment and phosphorus as a major contributor to the degradation of water quality in the lake. Both Greg and myself wrote the application for the TRIM together and just changed the HUC 12s we were planning to work in for each project. We both included demo farms in the grant application. Having many partners that agreed the demo farms were needed to get farmers to change their farming practices was paramount in convincing the DNR the project was worthy. Also, being the DNR had never approved funding for demo cover crop projects before, made it a unique and novel approach to tackling the water quality problem. And I'll let Greg take it from here.
Thank you, Jim. So to clarify, when we did our DNR TRIM applications, we each did individual applications, but we did submit them together. Jim and I wrote them together as a pair. In essence, they were the same application, except as Jim said, we used different HUC 12s. This was unique, and it actually piqued DNR's interest so much that they hosted a conference call to hear our proposal. Now, Jim highlighted some of the things we did within our TRIM project, but here's the other thing that we've worked with. With the Watershed Coalition, West Central Regional Planning Commission has taken a lead on a lot of these activities. We've pursued a variety of grants to fund activities which are supplementing those activities we have going on with the TRIM funded demo farms. Some of these grants include DNR surface water planning grants, DNR lake management plan and implementation grants. We have a grant through the EPA, which was an environmental education grant, and a couple of different XL Energy grants. XL Energy, also known locally as NSP, does have natural resource funds available for some grants. We often piggyback these grants to supplement some of the other grants. As Greg Baneck talked about, partnering these grants together can be complicated, but it does really make these work much better. So here's some of the different activities and projects we funded with some of these. As you see down here at the bottom of the screen is our watershed logo. That was one of the things which we worked with students. We started out with some students, but we actually ended up working with UW Extension to finalize our logo that we have within our watershed. We developed workshops that we hosted for farmers to do some soil health activities right on the farms. We also had, as part of that, soil test kits that we provided as gifts to farmers. We had demonstration farms through our no-till or through our DNR trim grants, but then we worked through another grant to get signage for our demonstration farms. We have our webpage. The Eau Claire River Watershed Coalition does host a webpage. The content and the fishing pictures are supplied by coalition members. In addition to the webpage, we also have a GIS story map. We have several different tabs on there to describe the waters within the watershed, some of our success stories, recreational opportunities, our challenges, and just kind of a general description about the watershed in and of itself. So again, this content is supplied by the Watershed Coalition members, so not just our land conservation staff. Clark County had a no-till drill. We had farmers in Eau Claire County requesting us to potentially have a no-till drill available for rental. So that led us to pursue a grant through XL Energy, along with donations from Pheasants Forever and a private donator. And we were able to purchase a no-till drill. And it was fully funded by grants and donations without any tax levy dollars. We also had placemats designed for the watershed. One side showing what a watershed is and how you could help, and the other side for people like me, the word search and the coloring pictures. We had these placemats designed by UW Eau Claire students. We had this initially as a proposal within our DNR trim grant, but that was not supported by DNR. So we just found a different grant to fund this. Our coalition members have been distributing these to our local watershed restaurants. Part of our EPA environmental grant I mentioned earlier, we had multiple workshops that we had done, hosting farmer workshops. We actually have one coming up here next week. On Monday and Wednesday of next week, we'll be hosting some of these local workshops. We've utilized our local land conservation nutrient management workshops. Our time that we put into those becomes a match on some of these grants. So as Greg Baneck mentioned, tracking your matching time can become complicated, but it works okay. The CPA grant also has many sub-grants associated with it. UW Eau Claire Hydrology Department is working with FFA students on content or hydrology information delivery. River Country RC&D is going to be hosting some grazing workshops here this year. We had the National Wildlife Federation host a train the trainer type workshop. Our local aid agents are working on a direct farmer soil health activities. And finally, the Eau Claire Health Department purchased one of these augmented reality sandboxes or a topo box. And they partnered with UW Eau Claire Geology Department and the Beaver Creek Reserve. We've also been working with UW Extension to do an overall evaluation of the CPA grant when we finalize this grant. The grant will finalize up this year. The final activity is a scheduled tour for our elected officials, showing them the activities that have been going on within the watershed, and that will be hosted by our local lake districts. We've been partnering with our highway department. Here's our river gauges, which are being installed along the Eau Claire River for monitoring of storm events. So that we worked with the highway department on that. And actually our highway department here in Eau Claire County is giving us some space in their shed to hold our no-till drill this winter. In addition, we're working with the National Weather Service. They're actually collecting our river data and using it within their flood prediction system. Greg Baneck showed his spreadsheet, the complications of the grants. This is a complication of our one grant for the EPA that we have. You see all the different activities we have and the funding sources. You're not supposed to be able to read this spreadsheet, just to show you, you have to track, but you can be creative in what you're doing. And in this case, regional planning became a lead partner on this grant. So you have to have a clean slate. Think outside of the box. Some of these grants, there's absolutely no way that Jim and I could have pulled these things off without relying on our partners. So oftentimes you think you're going to be doing some of these things on yourself, but actually you might be able to find someone who's willing to work with you. So don't be afraid to go outside of the box. Jim and I could not list all of our partners that we work with, but I would like to thank them all, and especially Dan Zur from UW Extension. He helps us locally facilitate our meetings. We do gather on a monthly basis, and hopefully soon here we'll be able to meet in person. I'd like to thank you all.
All right, there were just a couple of entries into the chat box. Amy in Dane County wanted to know what you included in your soil health kits.
We actually went, Kevin Erb had kind of set them up. We kind of followed his recipe with what was included in the soil health test kit. Some of the information, or some of the supplies we bought locally, some we worked with Kevin Erb to kind of put these pieces together.
Brian in Sauk County wanted to know how much that topo box cost.
Health Department ordered that. I do not recall. We had approximately $4,500 mini grants, and I think they utilized that and then some. I think they found additional funding.
All right, and lastly, Dan Zur wanted to know if that northern pike was photoshopped in your picture.
It was not.
Any other questions for Greg or Jim, or really our other presenters too? Kyle or Greg are still here with us. Okay.
If not, I would just like to thank everyone for the opportunities over the decades. I will be retiring this July. So just let you all know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. So thanks to all our presenters. Greg Leonard, Jim Arch, Kyle Minks, and Greg Baneck. Thanks to Dan McFarland, who helped with the Q&A and all of those links for helpful resources. I'm showing the CEU tracking sheet up here for a moment more. But as we conclude this session, we are also ending the conference. So Matt Kruger has a few closing words and the introduction for the business meeting that will follow.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks to all of our presenters. This does bring the session portion of our annual conference to a close, and wanted to just genuinely thank everybody who took the time to attend and to contribute. We know that these virtual meetings are really hard to find personal connection, which is really what we go to these types of events for. But everybody made such a good effort through engaging and through the chat box and everything. We're just very grateful for it and for your participation. And we look forward to being back in person with all of you at our next conference. So thank you very much. For those who are interested, we did update our annual conference program that's in the Conference Hub. And any of the links that were shared through the presentations have all been incorporated into that program. So for you to do some follow-up and look into some of the leads and resources that people posted in the chat box, that is available for you. So this brings the conference portion to a close. We are going to begin with our annual business meeting at 2:15. Everyone's welcome to stick around for it. But for voting delegates for their county LCC and LCD, please show up. We're going to start registration in 5 minutes and make sure everybody's all lined up and ready to go for the annual business meeting. So thank you all very much for contributing to another great conference and hopefully the last virtual conference we have to do for a long, long time. Thank you.